Hey guys, so I want to do a quick video today and talk about hamstring stretches, and specifically if hamstring stretches, well, if you should be doing them if you have lower back pain or if you are working with somebody, a client who has lower back pain. Are hamstring stretches really appropriate? And I think hamstring stretches are one of the common things that tend to be done, particularly with people with back pain. And so if we're going to look at that, then let's talk about it a little bit, because it's kind of a catch-22 going on. So here's what I did. I drew a couple of different diagrams, and if you look at the triangle, that is my attempt, not a very good one, but my attempt to draw the pelvis. So imagine that as your hips, and then down here is your leg. All right, so I have two different drawings here. And the reason why is because when we're looking at hamstring stretches, before we attempt to do anything, well, the first thing that we want to do, I think it's really important to understand either your or your client's physical profile type. Now, what do I mean by physical profile type? Well, what I found is that people will fall into one of two profile types. There's an extension dominant profile type and there's a flexion dominant profile type. And this is a huge part to really address it. Make sure that you're assessing it and identifying it, because without it, then you could really mess somebody up, right? If you don't know that. And here's what I'm talking about. Here over here, we've got the extension dominant profile type. So this is characteristic. If you've seen an extension dominant person, or you're trying to find out, there's different assessments and everything to really get it, but just for the saving time on this video and everything, I don't want to go off on like a 15-minute video, but a basic simple assessment is watch them squat. And the way that they'll perform a squat typically is they'll squat down and they're really sticking their butt out. It looks like they're just sticking their butt way out. It's kind of an exaggerated squat. And a lot of times with their trunk, it'll excessively lean forward. So typically you have an extension dominant person there. And what happens is basically we have an excessive anterior tilt, which, as you probably already know, usually means that they have tightness or dominance in the lumbar extensors. Lower back muscles are tight or dominant, and typically the hip flexors. So that's what creates that pull. Now, on the other hand, there's weakness that exists, and this is where it gets really important when we're thinking about hamstring stretching, because weakness typically exists in the abdominal muscles, and also weakness tends to exist in the hip extensors. And what I'm talking about there, the glutes, the glute max, and the hamstring. So this is where it's big, because a lot of these extension dominant profile types, they can present what looks to be tight hamstrings because they have this tilt, and it's lengthening the hamstrings. So when they move their legs, they don't have as much range of motion, and it's easy. It's kind of deceptive, right? Because it can look like they have tight hamstrings when in fact they really don't. What it's more a matter of is just restoring the normal alignment of the pelvis. That's going to help. So this is where it's big, because the hamstrings, well, like I said, that they're lengthened out. So we think about it, if this person, these are just people who are really prone to lower back problems because they have an excessive, they tend to have an excessive lordotic curve of the lower back because of this stuff going on, right? So it predisposes them to problems, and the hamstrings are lengthened out. So what we want to do, think about if we have, or if we do hamstring stretches for this type of person, are we going to help the problem, or are we making the problem worse? Right? Because the hamstrings are already lengthened out, so the last thing we want to do is stretch them out even more, because then what's going to happen, we just reinforce the compensation patterns. We reinforce the muscles that are tight and can make an existing problem even worse, or it just never gets any better, right? So over here, we have the opposite. This is our flexion dominant type. So typically a flexion dominant person, again, have them squat, simple assessment, and look at them. These are people who typically, they'll squat like they've got the tail tucked between the legs. They'll be stooped. And what you'll notice is that their hips they don't properly anteriorly tilt, right? They're kind of stuck in that posterior tilt. So what happens when they squat is everything moves forward. Their knees and their hips move forward. Their body just starts to move forward. And a lot of times, if they squat deep enough, they're just they're squatting like from the balls of their feet pretty much. And you'll see a lot of times then the trunk will just start to excessively round out. Right? It'll just be like hunchback type posture. So these are our flexion dominant profile types. Now, what we notice here is different from this guy in the extension dominant here. Right? Over here, we tend to have tightness in the hamstrings. Right? So that the hamstring tightness, what it does is it pretty much immobilizes the pelvis from tilting anteriorly, right? So they're stuck with that posterior tilt. So what we want to do is we want that hip to have normal movement, because when it's locked up in a posterior tilt, then notice the lumbar spine. Well, the natural lordotic curve starts to flatten out, and when one area of the body isn't moving, then the movement's going to be made up for in another area, because our bodies don't work like in isolation. Our bodies are integrated dynamic machines basically, and they function like all together. So when one area is not moving, then another area is going to try and make up for it. So what'll happen is then this guy will tend to take the brunt of everything, right? The low back. So again, this would be somebody who we would probably look at to stretch the hamstrings out, because we need to lengthen it to give the pelvis room to move. All right, so that's the difference, right? It really just comes down to determining if hamstring stretches are appropriate for you or your client when they have lower back pain. Then the big issue really comes down to, let's determine their physical profile type, determine which one they're in, and then make the decision from there. So hopefully this just gave a little bit more insight into doing hamstring stretches for those people with lower back pain. All right, if you have any other things that you want me to teach or talk about or do a blog post about in the future, go ahead and leave me a post here on the blog and let me know what you'd like to see, and I'll try and get to that as soon as I can in a future blog post or video. Until then, I'll talk to you soon.